The auditorium at Westwood University was packed. Hundreds of students filled the seats, their eager eyes fixed on the stage, where a long wooden table stood in the center. A banner above it read, "The Great Debate, Conservatism versus Liberalism." On one side of the table sat Karoline Leavitt, young, confident, and razor-sharp in her conservative viewpoints. She had debated on national television before, but this was different. This was a university setting, a place where conservative voices were often drowned out by loud opposition. But Karoline didn't come here to blend in, she came to make a statement. On the other side was Ethan Brooks, a well-known liberal student leader. Charismatic and outspoken, Ethan had led multiple campus protests and was hailed as a rising progressive voice. He leaned back in his chair, a smug grin on his face, as if the victory was already his. The moderator, a middle-aged professor with glasses perched on the edge of his nose, cleared his throat. "Tonight, we engage in a battle of ideas. No personal attacks, no interruptions. Let the best argument win." The crowd cheered, some holding signs in support of Ethan, others waving small American flags for Karoline. Then came the first question. Should the government impose stricter controls on free speech to prevent misinformation? Ethan grabbed the microphone first. "Absolutely," he said confidently. "Misinformation is dangerous. Hate speech, conspiracy theories, they spread like wildfire. We need regulations to protect people from harmful rhetoric. Words have consequences." A wave of applause rolled through the audience, mostly from liberal students. Ethan smirked, folding his arms. Karoline took a breath, her expression unshaken. "Free speech is not about protecting speech we like, it's about protecting speech we hate. Once the government decides what is misinformation, it controls the truth. That's dangerous." Ethan leaned forward. "So, you're saying lies should be protected?" Karoline smiled. "I'm saying you don't get to decide what the truth is. The same government you trust today could silence you tomorrow." A murmur spread through the crowd. Some students nodded. Others whispered to each other, reassessing their stance. Then came the next question. Should college campuses enforce diversity quotas in admissions? Ethan jumped in. Of course, systemic inequality exists. If we don't actively create opportunities for marginalized communities, then privileged groups will always dominate. The crowd erupted in cheers. Ethan basked in the support, looking at Karoline as if daring her to disagree. But Karoline didn't flinch. Diversity should be about ideas, not just skin color. The real injustice is judging people based on race instead of merit. Ethan laughed, shaking his head. "So you're ignoring history? You're pretending discrimination never happened?" Karoline's eyes locked onto his. "No, I'm saying that fixing past discrimination with new discrimination is not justice. We should lift people up based on their achievements, not box them into categories based on race." The room grew tense. Some students hesitated before clapping. A few even switched sides, nodding in agreement with Karoline. Ethan shifted in his seat. His confidence was slipping. Then, the final question of the round came. Should taxes be raised on the wealthy to fund social programs? Ethan's grin returned. Absolutely. The rich don't need more money. They should pay their fair share so that everyone can have healthcare, education, and basic human rights. Roaring applause filled the hall. Ethan looked at Karoline triumphantly, as if this was the knockout punch. Karoline picked up the mic slowly. "Do you own a phone, Ethan?" Ethan frowned. "What? A phone? Do you own one?" "Oh yeah? Did a poor person invent it?" Silent. Karoline leaned forward. "Innovation, hard work, and success create jobs. If you punish the wealthy, you punish the very people who drive the economy forward. The more we take from them, the less they invest, the fewer jobs they create. You're not hurting the rich, you're hurting the middle class and the poor." The applause was deafening. Even some of Ethan's supporters couldn't ignore the logic. Ethan's face turned red. He wasn't used to being challenged like this. The debate was just getting started, but for the first time, it looked like he was on the losing side. The tension in the auditorium was thick. Ethan Brooks, once brimming with confidence, now shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Karoline Leavitt had dismantled his arguments with precision, and the audience could feel the momentum shifting. But Ethan wasn't going down without a fight. The moderator adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. "Let's move on. Next question, should biological men be allowed to compete in women's sports?" A loud murmur swept through the crowd. This was a controversial one. Ethan grabbed the mic, his voice steady but slightly defensive. "Look, sports should be inclusive. Trans women are women. Denying them a place in female sports is discrimination. It's about fairness and equality." A section of the audience erupted in cheers. Others remained silent, waiting for Karoline's response. Karoline leaned in, her expression unbothered. "Fairness? Do you really think a biological male competing against a biological female is fair?" Ethan's jaw clenched. Science has shown. Karoline cut in, her voice sharp but controlled. Science has shown that biological males have a natural advantage, greater muscle mass, bone density, lung capacity. If you truly care about fairness, why aren't you defending female athletes who train their whole lives only to be beaten by someone with a biological advantage? The room was dead silent. Even some of Ethan's most vocal supporters hesitated. Then, a student from the audience, clearly a supporter of Ethan, stood up and shouted, "You're a bigot!" Gasps echoed through the hall. The moderator held up his hand, trying to restore order, but Karoline didn't need anyone to defend her. She turned toward the student with a calm smile. "Calling me names won't change biological facts. If you believe in fairness, then answer this. Should a teenage boy, just because he identifies as a girl, be allowed to compete against female athletes and take their scholarships?" The student opened their mouth, but said nothing. The crowd waited. Ethan seized the moment. "Karoline, this debate isn't about facts. It's about feelings." She smirked. "And that's the problem. We're supposed to be debating reality, not emotion." Another wave of applause. Ethan's frustration was visible now. His argument was crumbling, and he knew it. But the real twist was yet to come. The moderator cleared his throat. "Next question, does systemic racism still exist in America?" Ethan immediately jumped in, as if he had been waiting for them. "Of course. Look at incarceration rates, wage gaps, housing discrimination. Racism is deeply embedded in our system, and conservatives like Karoline refuse to acknowledge it." Some students cheered, their energy renewed. Karoline didn't flinch. "Ethan, tell me, how much do you pay in tuition?" Ethan blinked. "What? How much?" she repeated. "Well, I have scholarships," he admitted. Karoline nodded. "Scholarships based on what?" Ethan hesitated. "Some are need-based, some are for minority students." Karoline leaned in. "So you got into this elite university with financial aid? In a country you claim is systemically racist?" The room was still. Even Ethan looked momentarily caught off guard. She continued. "America isn't perfect, but if it were truly designed to hold minorities down, why do we have programs, scholarships, and laws specifically helping them? Why are immigrants of all backgrounds coming here and succeeding?" Ethan swallowed hard. "That doesn't erase history. No, but it proves that anyone, regardless of race, can achieve success here." This time, even some of Ethan's usual supporters clapped. The room was shifting. Karoline looked around at the students. "The real question is, do you want to be a victim of the past, or do you want to be a victor in the present?" Ethan clenched his fists. His arguments were falling apart, and the debate wasn't even over yet. The atmosphere in the auditorium was electric. Ethan Brooks, once confident and smug, now sat rigid, his jaw tight. Karoline Leavitt, on the other hand, looked composed, her words slicing through the debate like a knife through butter. But Ethan wasn't done yet. He still had one more trick up his sleeve. The moderator adjusted his notes. "Let's move to our next topic. Is capitalism a fair system, or does it exploit the poor?" Ethan grabbed the mic like a lifeline. This was his chance to turn the debate around. Capitalism is a system designed to benefit the rich. The wealthy hoard resources while the working class struggles to survive. The government must step in to redistribute wealth fairly. Cheers erupted from his side of the audience. He sat back, shooting Karoline a victorious look. She smiled. "Ethan, do you have a job?" Ethan hesitated. "Well, I do some freelance." "And do you choose to work?" "Of course." Karoline nodded. "Then congratulations, you just proved capitalism works. You trade your time and skills for money. No one is forcing you to work. In a socialist system, the government decides what you do, what you earn, and what you're worth. That is real exploitation." The audience murmured. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "But let's go further," Karoline continued. "You say capitalism exploits the poor. Tell me, where do poor people live better, America or socialist countries like Venezuela?" Ethan swallowed. That's not a fair comparison." "It's completely fair," Karoline counted. "In socialist countries, people stand in bread lines. Here, even low-income families have smartphones, cars, and access to opportunities. Capitalism doesn't keep people down, it gives them the tools to rise." The crowd erupted in applause. Even some of Ethan's supporters hesitated before clapping. Ethan's face turned red. His carefully rehearsed arguments were falling apart. But then something unexpected happened. A student, one of Ethan's biggest supporters, stood up and shouted, "You're just defending the rich." Karoline turned to him unshaken. "No, I'm defending opportunity. You want equality of outcome, but I believe in equality of opportunity. If you want success, work for it. No government owes you anything." The student stammered, But what about people who can't succeed?" Karoline's eyes locked onto his. "If you tell people they can't succeed, they never will. I believe in empowering people, not making them dependent on the government. Do you want the state to control your life, or do you want the freedom to build your own future? Silence. Even Ethan had nothing to say. The debate was slipping from his grasp. The audience could feel it, and the final blow was still coming. The auditorium was no longer just a debate hall. It had become an intellectual battlefield. Ethan Brooks sat with his arms crossed, visibly frustrated, while Karoline Leavitt remained poised, her confidence unshaken. The audience was no longer one-sided. Many who had come in supporting Ethan were now nodding along to Karoline's argument. The moderator took a deep breath, sensing the weight of the moment. Final topic of the night. Does America need more government intervention or less? Ethan leaned forward, gripping the microphone tightly. This was his last chance to recover. The government must step in to ensure fairness. Without regulations, without social programs, people will suffer. The rich will continue to exploit the system while ordinary people are left behind. If we want a just society, we need the government to provide healthcare, housing, and basic income for everyone. Cheers erupted from a section of the audience, but this time they weren't as strong as before. Many students who had started the night supporting Ethan were now hesitant. They had seen how Karoline dismantled his previous argument. Was this one going to be any different? Karoline let Ethan's words settle before picking up her microphone. She smiled slightly, tilting her head. Ethan, tell me, what's the government really good at? Ethan frowned. What? She repeated. What does the government actually do well? Ethan scoffed. It provides for people. Karoline raised an eyebrow. Like the DMV? Like the post office? Like public housing projects that end up failing? Like the massive bureaucracies that take years to accomplish something a private company could do in months? A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. Ethan's supporters weren't laughing. Karoline leaned in. You say government should provide healthcare, housing, and income for everyone. But who pays for it? Ethan rolled his eyes. The rich. The rich? Karoline repeated, amused. Ethan, if we tax the top 1% at 100%, it wouldn't even cover our national budget. And do you know what the rich would do if we took all their money? Ethan stayed silent. They'd leave. Karoline continued. They'd take their businesses, their jobs, and their innovation somewhere else. And who suffers then? Ethan muttered, the middle class. Karoline nodded. Exactly. The government creates dependency, but capitalism creates opportunity. When you take away the incentive to work, to build, to achieve, people stop trying. That's why socialist experiments always fail. The crowd was shifting completely now. Even students who had booed Karoline earlier were nodding. Ethan was cornered. He was scrambling for a response. But without government, what about people who need help? The disabled, the elderly, the struggling single mothers? Karoline's expression softened. We absolutely need to help those who can't help themselves. But that's where communities step in, charities step in, families step in. A faceless bureaucracy doesn't love you. It doesn't know your name, but people do. We don't need a bigger government, we need a stronger society. For the first time all night, Ethan had no comeback. He looked out at the audience, but the faces that had once cheered him on were now deep in thought. The debate wasn't just a battle of ideas anymore. It was a shift in perspective, and Karoline had just won. The air in the auditorium was thick with tension. Ethan Brooks, once the confident liberal student leader, now sat stiffly in his chair, gripping the microphone like it was his last lifeline. Karoline Leavitt, on the other hand, remained composed, her sharp responses leaving the audience hanging on her every word. The moderator glanced between them, sensing the dramatic shift in the debate. He cleared his throat. We've covered major political issues tonight. Before we wrap up, let's give each debater a chance for their final statement. Ethan sat up straighter, exhaling sharply. This was his last chance to reclaim the audience. He forced a smirk, trying to gather his usual charm. Look, he began, scanning the crowd. I know some of you are questioning things right now, but let's not forget what's at stake. Conservatives like Karoline love to throw around words like freedom and capitalism, but at the end of the day, these ideas don't feed the hungry. They don't house the homeless. They don't fix systemic oppression. Government intervention isn't about control, it's about compassion. If we don't take action, people will suffer. That's a fact. Some cheers rang out from his side of the audience, but they were noticeably weaker than before. The energy had shifted. The students who had once cheered for Ethan now seemed unsure. Karoline nodded as if she had expected that response. Then she picked up her microphone for the final time. Ethan, you talk about compassion, but tell me this, who has done more to help the poor? The government or private citizens? Ethan frowned. The government provides essential. Karoline cut in. Who donates more money to charity? Who builds businesses that create jobs? Who starts organizations to feed the hungry and shelter the homeless? The people, not the government. The government takes, the people give. Silence. Karoline turned to the audience. Compassion isn't forcing taxpayers to fund bloated programs that barely work. Compassion is creating a society where people have the ability to help each other. And that only happens when we have freedom, when we have capitalism, when we take personal responsibility instead of waiting for the government to fix our problem. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. The debate was slipping further and further away from it. Karoline continued, her voice steady but firm. You say capitalism doesn't feed the hungry? It built McDonald's, it built grocery stores, it created food delivery service. You say it doesn't house the homeless? It created construction companies, real estate businesses, technology to build better homes. You say it doesn't fix problems? It built the medicines, the hospitals, the jobs, the economy that gives everyone a shot at success. A wave of applause thundered through the room. Even some of Ethan's closest supporters were clapping now. Ethan shook his head, running out of options. But what about the people who don't make it? What about the ones who fail? Karoline's expression didn't waver. Failure is part of life, Ethan. It's not the government's job to remove struggle. It's our job to overcome it. The American dream isn't a guarantee of success. It's the opportunity to try, to fail, and to rise again. That was it. A knockout punch. The crowd erupted in applause, louder than at any point in the night. Some students stood, clapping enthusiastically. Even those who didn't fully agree with Karoline couldn't deny that she had dominated the debate. Ethan sat back, defeated. He had walked into the debate expecting to dismantle a conservative voice, but instead, it was his arguments that had fallen apart. The moderator stepped in, barely able to get the audience to settle down. Well, that concludes tonight's debate. Thank you to both of our speakers. Karoline smiled, shaking Ethan's hand as a courtesy. He muttered something under his breath before quickly stepping off stage. As Karoline gathered her things, several students approached her, not just conservative, but students who had thought they were liberal. I never saw it that way before. One student admitted. You actually made me think tonight, another said. Karoline simply smiled. This wasn't just a debate, it was a wake-up call, and she had won. If you enjoyed this debate and want to see more powerful discussions like this, make sure to subscribe. Don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. Do you agree with Karoline, or do you think Ethan had a point? Let's talk in the comments.